My name is Rashima. I'm 33 years old. 3 weeks before my wedding, my mother called while I was auditing a high-risk corporate merger from my home office in California. She did not ask how the planning was going. She did not ask if I was resting. Her voice cut through the phone speaker, sharp and impatient. "Rashima, your wedding can wait. We need to push the date. Tiffany is turning 27, and her milestone birthday gala is more important right now." I sat back in my leather desk chair. The blue light from my dual monitors reflected off the glass of water next to my keyboard. I watched a drop of condensation slide down the glass, feeling the cool air from the vents brush against my arms. "My invitations were sent a month ago," I said, keeping my tone flat. "Send an update email," my mother scoffed. "Tiffany has brand sponsors attending. Her aesthetic needs this specific weekend. Besides, Julian is just a data analyst. He is a nobody. Why are you rushing to marry someone who cannot even provide for you?" For most of my life, a demand like that would have triggered a familiar, suffocating panic. I would have scrambled to fix it, terrified of being labeled the selfish daughter. I would have apologized and opened my wallet. But sitting there, listening to the distant hum of traffic outside my apartment, the panic never arrived. A quiet, clinical stillness replaced it. "Noted," I whispered, and pressed the red button to end the call. Before I explain what happened next and why my mother spent the next 6 hours leaving me 47 terrified voicemails, welcome to Grape Vengeance. Tell me your age and where you are listening from in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. My family always treated my reliability as an unlimited resource. When I was 24, I paid off my mother's mortgage arrears so the bank would not foreclose on her house. When Tiffany wanted to be a lifestyle influencer, I bought her first professional camera and lighting equipment. In their minds, I was the invisible safety net. I existed to absorb their financial mistakes and clear a path for Tiffany to shine. My career in corporate risk auditing was deemed boring, useful only when they needed a check written. They treated Julian the same way. We met 2 years ago at a coffee shop in San Jose. My mother met him once, saw his plain gray sweater and quiet demeanor, and immediately dismissed him as an underachiever. She assumed his reluctance to brag about money meant he had none. She never bothered to look past the surface. By evening, my phone screen was a solid wall of missed call notifications. 47 voicemails from my mother. Her tone in the audio transcriptions shifted from demanding to frantic. I placed the phone face down on the kitchen island. Julian stood by the stove stirring 2 cups of tea. He wore that same faded gray sweater. He glanced at the glowing edge of my phone, then looked at me, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his face. They finally realized something he said softly, handing me a warm ceramic mug. What they realized was that I had not just ignored the phone call. I had opened a new audit file, and they were about to learn what happens when you try to steal from a woman who tracks every digital footprint they leave behind. The ceramic mug radiated warmth against my palms, contrasting with the sudden chill creeping down my spine. I stood in the kitchen, the scent of bergamot and black tea filling the space as my laptop chimed from the adjacent dining table. It was a sharp, high-pitched alert I had specifically assigned to my primary wedding email account. I set the mug down on the granite counter. The marble surface was smooth and unforgiving under my fingertips. I walked over, tapping the trackpad to wake the screen. The subject line read, "Confirmation of venue modification." It was from the luxury botanical florist I had booked 8 months ago. My eyes scanned the body of the email. It thanked me for my recent phone call and confirmed that the installation address for the white orchids, suspended greenery, and aisle arrangements had been updated. The new delivery location was not the coastal estate I had painstakingly chosen. It was a trendy, overpriced glass pavilion downtown, the exact venue Tiffany had been obsessing over on her social media feed for weeks. My mother had not just called to demand I postpone my wedding. While I was reviewing corporate risk profiles earlier that afternoon, she had actively impersonated me. I clicked into the catering portal. My pulse remained remarkably steady. Years of forensic auditing had trained me to view anomalies not as emotional betrayals, but as data points requiring immediate lockdown. The catering dashboard loaded, displaying a bright green banner acknowledging my recent menu adjustments. The artisan flatbreads, the roasted sea bass, and the specialized dietary requests I had mapped out for our guests were gone. In their place were custom cocktail stations, a champagne tower, and tiered birthday cupcakes decorated in Tiffany's signature pastel colors. Brenda had stolen my vendors. She had used my name, my reservation numbers, and my financial deposits to bankroll my sister's vanity project. A memory flickered in the back of my mind, harsh and unwelcome. I was 22, standing in a crowded bank lobby on a Tuesday afternoon, discovering that my mother had used my Social Security number to open a secondary credit card. She had maxed it out to buy Tiffany a designer graduation wardrobe. When confronted, Brenda had simply brushed it off, claiming we were family and what was mine was inherently theirs. She told me I was being dramatic over a piece of plastic. I had paid the debt quietly, taking on extra shifts, desperate to keep the peace and avoid the inevitable smear campaign she would launch if I refused. That was the old version of me, the girl who believed compliance earned affection, the girl who thought being dependable meant being a human shield. The woman sitting at the dining table now operated under a different set of rules. I had spent the last decade building a career out of finding the truth hidden beneath layers of corporate deceit. I did not pick up my phone to scream at my mother. Anger was a useless currency when dealing with people who fed on emotional reactions. Instead, I pulled my chair closer to the desk, the leather creaking slightly in the quiet room. I opened a new encrypted digital folder on my desktop, naming it Event Breach. My fingers moved across the keyboard in a rapid, practiced rhythm. I navigated directly to the security settings of every single vendor account tied to my wedding. I revoked all authorized user permissions, instantly deleting my mother's email and phone number from the contact lists. I initiated two-factor authentication across the board, linking the login approvals exclusively to my personal device. The screen flashed with confirmation prompts, solidifying the digital walls around my accounts. Next, I drafted a formal correspondence to the florist and the catering director. I did not use the frantic tone of a betrayed bride. I used the precise, legally binding language of a corporate auditor. I stated that unauthorized modifications had been made to my contracts under false pretenses. I formally requested the immediate transmission of all IP login logs associated with the account changes. Furthermore, I invoked the security clause of their service agreements, demanding the digital audio files of the recorded customer service calls where the modifications were requested. I wanted Brenda's voice on tape confirming the fraud. I wanted the timestamp of her theft preserved in an unalterable format. Julian walked into the dining area, his footsteps silent on the hardwood floor. He leaned against the edge of the table, crossing his arms over his faded gray sweater. He watched the lines of text appear on my screen, his dark eyes tracking the speed of my typing. He did not ask if I was okay. He knew me well enough to recognize the cold focus taking over my features. He is 37, a man who built his life in the shadows of the tech industry, preferring the quiet power of back-end infrastructure over flashy public displays. My family saw his unassuming wardrobe, his quiet demeanor, and his refusal to engage in their status games, and they labeled him weak. They assumed his silence meant he had nothing to say. They had no idea that the man watching me secure my vendor portals possessed the kind of systemic leverage that could dismantle a corporate empire before lunch. "Do you want me to step in?" Julian asked, his voice low and steady. I paused, my thumb hovering over the spacebar. It was a genuine offer. With one phone call, he could have deployed resources that would make my family's financial lives incredibly difficult. He could have frozen accounts, triggered investigations, or simply bought out the vendors entirely. The temptation flared for a fraction of a second, hot and bright, before I stamped it out. "No," I replied, keeping my gaze locked on the glowing monitor. "If you intervene now, they will just play the victim. They will spin a narrative claiming a wealthy man is bullying them, and they will use those tears to garner sympathy from the rest of the family. I need to build the evidence file. I need to let them think they have won, so they keep making mistakes. When people believe they are untouchable, they become sloppy. Julian smiled, a subtle shift in his expression that radiated quiet pride. He understood the architecture of a trap better than anyone. He reached out his hand, covering mine, his palm warm against my skin. "They think they are dealing with the girl who always backs down," he murmured, his thumb brushing across my knuckles. I turned my hand over, lacing my fingers through his. That girl no longer exists. I hit send on the emails. The outgoing message chime echoed in the stillness of the apartment. I leaned back in my chair, stretching the tension from my shoulders. The initial breach was contained. My vendors were locked down, the paper trail was secured, and the trap was officially set. My mother thought she was outsmarting a stressed bride. She did not realize she was leaving digital fingerprints on a crime scene managed by an auditor. Then my phone vibrated on the kitchen island. The screen illuminated the dim room, casting a pale glow across the granite counter. I let go of Julianne's hand and walked over to retrieve the device. The notification was a text message from Tiffany. I unlocked the screen. The message contained a string of party emojis, followed by a picture of a fabric swatch in a sickeningly sweet shade of blush pink. The text beneath it dripped with a toxic, performative sweetness. "Mom said you were overwhelmed with work and decided to donate your flower deposit to my milestone gala. You are the best, sister. Trent and I are going to make sure the arrangements look amazing in the pavilion. Do not worry, we will tag you in the photos so you feel included." I read the message twice. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. But it was the mention of the pavilion that caught my attention. Tiffany was not just bragging about the flowers. She was inadvertently revealing the scope of the operation. She believed she had already secured the pavilion, which meant Trent was actively funding the relocation of my stolen assets. But the flowers and the food were just the surface-level details. If they were brazen enough to steal the catering, they were arrogant enough to go after the foundation of the event itself. Tiffany's message was a victory lap for a race she did not realize she was losing. A cold realization washed over me, tightening the muscles in my chest. I opened my email application again, bypassing the vendor folder and going straight to the primary contract I had signed 11 months ago. I needed to check the status of my venue. The sabotage was not just about aesthetic birthday decorations or cocktail stations. They were trying to dismantle my entire wedding, piece by piece, and claim the wreckage for themselves. The screen loaded, and the true depth of their scheme was about to reveal itself. I stared at the loading icon spinning on my laptop screen. The Vineyard portal was sluggish, taking crucial seconds to verify my credentials. During that brief digital hesitation, my mind drifted back to the origin of this entitlement. How had my mother and sister developed such a breathtaking level of audacity? The answer was buried deep within my own financial history. I opened a secondary tab, pulling up my archived banking ledgers from 5 years ago. My eyes traced the rows of outgoing wire transfers. I had spent my 20s treating their emergencies as my personal obligations. When I was 25, Brenda had called me sobbing, claiming the bank was initiating foreclosure proceedings on her house. I had worked exhausting double shifts during the height of corporate tax season, liquidating my early retirement fund to clear her mortgage arrears. I did not buy a car that year. I took the bus in the freezing rain so my mother could keep her manicured lawn and her pride intact. 2 years later, Tiffany decided traditional employment was beneath her. She demanded a career as a lifestyle influencer. She needed a professional camera, specialized lighting rings, and a high-performance laptop to edit her videos. Brenda insisted I fund the venture, calling it a necessary investment in my sister's future. I purchased the equipment, spending thousands of dollars I had saved for my own down payment on a house. The moment the items arrived, the narrative was instantly rewritten. In their revised version of reality, Tiffany was a self-made entrepreneur who manifested her own success, while I was just the boring corporate drone who sat on a pile of hoarded cash. My sacrifices were erased, transformed into their rightful entitlements. They grew accustomed to spending my money while despising the discipline it took to earn it. I was the invisible anchor, meant to stay submerged in the dark so they could float on the surface. The venue portal finally loaded, snapping my attention back to the present. The dashboard appeared normal. My name was still listed as the primary account holder. The October date was intact. Then my cell phone rang. The caller identification displayed a Napa Valley area code. It was the direct office line for Marissa, the senior event coordinator at my chosen vineyard estate. I answered on the second ring, placing the phone on speaker and setting it beside my keyboard. "Reshima, I am so sorry to bother you," Marissa said. Her voice lacked its usual polished hospitality. It was thin, tight, and laced with genuine panic. "I have a very chaotic situation unfolding in the main tasting room right now." Julian stepped closer, leaning over my shoulder to listen. I kept my hands resting flat on the edge of the desk, feeling the cool wood beneath my palms. "Explain the situation," I instructed, keeping my tone perfectly level. "Your mother and sister are physically here," Marissa whispered, her breath hitching as if she were hiding behind a closed, solid oak door. They bypassed the reception desk and walked straight into my private office. "Reshima, they are claiming you are suffering a severe psychological breakdown due to extreme work stress. They brought a printed letter, supposedly from a clinic, stating you are unfit to make binding legal decisions." The sheer mechanics of their lie settled over me like a cold winter fog. They had not just impersonated me over the phone to steal flower arrangements. They had forged medical documents to declare me mentally incompetent in front of a luxury vendor. "Go on," I said. "They are demanding I transfer your entire $40,000 non-refundable deposit to a new event contract." Marissa continued, her words rushing out in a terrified stream. "They want to rebrand the weekend as a wellness retreat and milestone birthday celebration for Tiffany to salvage the funds before you allegedly cancel everything. They are insisting I sign the transfer paperwork right now to secure the pavilion space." I did not gasp. I did not express outrage. I shifted instantly into the mindset of a senior risk auditor facing a hostile corporate takeover. "Marissa, listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet dining room. "I am sitting at my desk in California. I am of sound mind, and I have not authorized any medical proxy. If you accept a single signature from Brenda or Tiffany, you are committing tortious interference. If you alter the name on that contract, I will bypass arbitration and file a multi-million-dollar corporate litigation suit against the Vineyard Ownership Group for breach of fiduciary duty and contract fraud. I will ensure your venue operations are frozen pending a lengthy legal review." A heavy silence fell over the line, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "I understand," Marissa replied, the panic instantly replaced by strict professional compliance. "I am locking your physical file in my safe right now. No changes will be made to the itinerary or the billing profile. Thank you. Now tell me who else is with them." Tiffany and Brenda did not have the financial leverage to orchestrate this operation alone. A luxury wellness retreat required specialized catering, lodging, upgrades, and entertainment retainers that my initial deposit would not fully cover. Someone was acting as their safety net, providing the capital required to finalize the hostile takeover. "There's a man with them," Marissa murmured. "He is wearing a custom-tailored suit. He slapped a premium titanium credit card on my desk the moment he walked in. He told me to stop worrying about the policies because his card has no limit and he is willing to pay a 20% premium fee to expedite the contract transfer. He said his name is Trent." The final piece of the puzzle snapped into place. Trent, Tiffany's fiancé. He was a commercial real estate developer, known for his flashy social media presence and ruthless business tactics. He leased exotic cars and bragged constantly about his sprawling development projects. Tiffany had spent the last 8 months flaunting his supposed wealth, treating him like a king who had descended from the sky to elevate her social status. Trent viewed the world entirely through the lens of financial leverage. He believed his money gave him the unquestionable right to rewrite reality. He was bankrolling the theft of my wedding to secure the ultimate aesthetic background for Tiffany's birthday photos, likely believing he could bully a mere corporate auditor into silent submission. "Do not process his card under any circumstances," I instructed Marissa. "Ask them to leave the property immediately. If they refuse, call local law enforcement, and have them trespassed for creating a public disturbance. I will handle it, she promised, ending the call. Julian picked up my empty ceramic mug, his jaw set in a hard, rigid line. He despised men like Trent, men who use their financial weight to intimidate and coerce others. Julian built secure systems to protect data, while Trent built hollow facades to feed his towering ego. He is financing the sabotage, I said, looking up at Julian. He is stepping onto a battlefield he does not understand. Julian replied softly, his dark eyes reflecting the harsh light of the monitor. Before I could navigate back to my email client, my phone vibrated against the wood grain of the desk. A new voicemail notification popped onto the screen. The caller identification matched a number I had seen tagged on Tiffany's social media posts. It was Trent's corporate business line. I tapped the play button, projecting the audio into the room. Trent's voice oozed with condescending authority, the exact tone reserved for dismissing junior employees or service staff. Listen closely, Rashima. The recording began featuring the faint sound of a car engine revving in the background. Your mother told me about your little stubborn streak regarding the venue. Let us be realistic here. You and Julian do not belong in a place like that. Julian is a freelance keyboard warrior who probably cannot even afford the catering upgrades. Tiffany has actual brand sponsors relying on this aesthetic. I am doing you a massive favor by taking over the contract, so you do not bankrupt yourselves trying to play pretend. Do not make this difficult. Release the venue by tomorrow morning, or I will use my executive connections in the Valley to make sure your firm reevaluates your employment status. Have a good night. The recording clicked off, leaving a heavy, charged silence in its wake. He had not just insulted my fiancé. He had issued a formal extortion threat, attempting to leverage his perceived corporate power against my career. He wanted a war, relying on his titanium credit card to shield him from the consequences. He was about to learn that true power does not announce itself with flashy suits and loud demands. True power waits in the silence, documenting every mistake, preparing to strike when the enemy feels most secure. The echo of Trent's voicemail faded, leaving only the steady hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the distant sound of evening traffic drifting through the open window. I did not delete the audio file. I archived it. A verbal threat is often difficult to prosecute without supporting documentation, relying heavily on a subjective interpretation of intent. Arrogant men, however, rarely stop at just one mistake. They crave the permanence of a written decree, driven by a deep-seated need to assert their dominance on the record. Sure enough, less than 10 minutes later, a new notification pushed to the top of my inbox. It was not a casual text message. It was a formal communication originating directly from the primary domain of his commercial real estate firm. The subject line was stark and uncompromising, labeled simply as venue resolution and career considerations. I opened the message. The screen cast a bright white glow across the dim dining room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Trent had bypassed any semblance of professional decorum, diving straight into a codified extortion attempt. He believed his official letterhead provided an impenetrable shield of authority. Instead, he had just handed me a signed confession on a silver platter. The text was formatted in crisp corporate paragraphs, a stark contrast to the thuggish nature of the demands hidden within the prose. He reiterated his requirement that I relinquish the vineyard contract within 24 hours, transferring all venue rights to Tiffany. If I failed to comply, he outlined a precise sequence of professional consequences. He claimed to play golf with 3 senior partners at my auditing firm. He suggested that one casual conversation about my lack of cooperative spirit, my supposed emotional instability, could easily stall my upcoming promotion to managing director. He painted a picture of my career crumbling with a single phone call from his country club. He then directed his attention toward my fiancé. He explicitly mocked Julian, describing him in the email as a freelance keyboard warrior who lacked the financial stamina to survive a protracted legal battle. He advised me to drop the dead weight, surrender the estate deposit, and let the real adults handle the logistics. My pulse did not race. I felt the familiar, icy calm that always accompanied the discovery of a critical vulnerability in a client portfolio. When you spend your days hunting down hidden liabilities in high-stakes corporate mergers, an intimidation tactic from a local developer feels amateurish. Trent was acting like a kingmaker, entirely unaware that he was standing on a digital trapdoor. I highlighted the entire text, selected the forwarding option, and routed the message directly to my encrypted off-site server. I tagged the file under corporate extortion and attached the correlating Internet Protocol routing data to ensure the chain of custody remained pristine. Julian leaned forward, bracing his hands on the back of my desk chair. The leather creaked slightly under his grip. He read the screen in silence, his eyes tracking the lines of text. The muscles in his jaw tightened, forming a sharp ridge beneath his skin. He did not raise his voice. He did not pound his fist against the table or utter a single curse word. The quiet men are always the most dangerous because they do not waste energy on performative anger. He simply pulled his phone from his pocket, walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the dark city skyline, and dialed a number from memory. I watched his reflection in the glass. He spoke in a hushed, rapid cadence, employing terminology that instantly stripped away the facade of a simple data analyst. Initiate a preliminary risk sweep on the primary holdings for Trent's development group, Julian instructed the unseen person on the other end of the line. Check the debt-to-equity ratios on his current commercial leases. I want a full breakdown of his mezzanine financing, specifically looking for any covenant breaches tied to his mandatory liquidity reserves. Flag the executive communication logs for compliance violations. Yes, prioritize the regional files and expedite the summary report. He ended the call, slipping the device back into his pocket. The air in the room felt altered, charged with a sudden invisible gravity. My family had spent 2 years treating Julian like a background character, an insignificant extra in the grand production of their lives. They had mistaken his lack of ostentatious display for a lack of resources, assuming his plain sweaters meant he had nothing of value to offer. They failed to realize that true wealth often whispers, while crushing debt screams for attention. While Julian stared out at the city lights, I opened a new browser window. If Trent was desperate enough to extort a wedding venue for a birthday party, his financial foundation was likely cracking. Truly wealthy developers do not steal deposits from their future sister-in-law. They simply write a check to rent a different estate. I accessed a subscription-based corporate registry database, a forensic tool I use daily to vet potential merger candidates. I entered his company name into the search parameter, bypassed the public relations filters, and hit enter. The results populated instantly, painting a bleak and undeniable picture of his actual reality. Trent was highly leveraged, balanced on a precarious knife edge of financial ruin. His firm was drowning in high-interest short-term loans, desperately trying to bridge the gap between stalled construction projects. His flagship endeavor, a sprawling commercial complex in downtown San Francisco, was currently halted. He was bleeding capital every single day that concrete was not being poured and steel was not being erected. He urgently needed an influx of new investor cash to keep his empire from collapsing into bankruptcy. Suddenly, Tiffany's frantic push for an extravagant, highly publicized birthday gala made perfect sense. It was not just about securing aesthetic photos for her social media feed or feeding her insatiable vanity. It was a calculated, desperate public relations maneuver. Trent needed the brand sponsors, the wealthy attendees, and the illusion of limitless prosperity to project stability to his nervous creditors. He was trying to use my wedding infrastructure, my deposits, and my careful planning to stage a luxury commercial for his failing brand. I dug deeper into the stalled San Francisco project, scanning the municipal permit logs and investor disclosures. The construction halt was not due to a labor strike, a supply chain shortage, or a zoning issue. The project was under a mandatory operational freeze, pending a comprehensive structural and digital security audit. The primary institutional investors had demanded a rigorous third-party review of his entire corporate ecosystem before releasing the next critical round of funding. I found the public filing listing the regulatory agency assigned to conduct the independent review. I read the name of the firm 3 times, ensuring my eyes were not deceiving me. A sharp, undeniable thrill shot through my chest, chasing away the lingering shadows of my family's betrayal. The organization holding Trent's financial survival in its hands was a premier global cybersecurity and risk management conglomerate. It was the exact firm that operated under Julian's direct executive control. Trent had just sent a documented extortion threat originating from his corporate email server directly to the partner of the man who possessed the unilateral authority to finalize or destroy his entire portfolio. He had handed the executioner his own warrant. I turned in my chair to tell Julian what I had found, ready to lay out the parameters of the trap we were about to spring. The pieces were perfectly aligned for a devastating corporate checkmate. But before I could speak, a new notification chimed from my phone. This time, it was not an email or a text message from a relative. It was an automated security alert from the exclusive bridal boutique where my custom-tailored wedding dress had been stored in a climate-controlled vault for the final fitting. The alert stared back at me, a sterile digital sentence that escalated the war far beyond venues and flowers. It stated that my gown, paid for in full, had been successfully signed out and permanently removed from the premises by an authorized family representative. The screen of my phone displayed a sterile, automated text message that shattered the quiet atmosphere of my dining room. Your custom garment has been successfully released to your authorized representative. Thank you for choosing our boutique. I stared at the glowing pixels. A cold knot formed in my stomach, distinct from the analytical detachment I had felt moments prior. My wedding dress was not a simple off-the-rack purchase. It was an $8,000 gown crafted from imported silk and hand-stitched French lace, requiring 4 months of meticulous tailoring. It was currently supposed to be secured in a climate-controlled vault in an upscale boutique across town, awaiting my final fitting on Friday. I did not have an authorized representative. I grabbed my car keys from the granite counter. Julian watched me, reading the shift in my posture. I told him to stay at the apartment and continue building the digital net around Trent's financial records. This specific breach required a physical response. The drive down the California coast was a study in sensory dissonance. The afternoon sun bathed the highway in a warm golden light, while the air conditioning in my sedan blasted icy air against my face. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel, holding it so tight my knuckles turned white. My mother had escalated her campaign from digital impersonation to physical theft. I pulled into the pristine parking lot of the bridal boutique. The bell above the glass door chimed a delicate, cheerful note as I walked inside. The showroom smelled of fresh lilies and steamed silk. Geneviève, the boutique owner, stood behind the polished mahogany reception desk. She looked up, offering a bright, welcoming smile that quickly faltered when she recognized my face. "Rashima," she said, her voice dropping into a tone of genuine confusion. "We were not expecting you until Friday. Your mother just left an hour ago with the garment bag." I stopped in the center of the showroom. The plush carpet absorbed the sound of my footsteps. I kept my voice eerily calm, refusing to exhibit the hysterical bride trope she likely encountered on a weekly basis. "Genevieve, I said maintaining direct eye contact. I did not authorize anyone to collect my dress." "Why did you release inventory to a third party without calling me to verify?" The color drained from her face. She practically scrambled toward a filing cabinet beneath the register, her manicured fingers trembling slightly as she pulled out a manila folder. She placed a single sheet of paper on the glass counter, sliding it toward me. She presented legal documentation. Geneviève stammered, her defensive posture betraying her rising panic. "She said you were overwhelmed with corporate audits and assigned her to handle the final logistics." I looked down at the paper. It was a formal power of attorney declaration. The document granted Brenda full administrative rights over my wedding contracts and physical property. At the bottom of the page rested a signature attempting to mimic my handwriting. Beside it sat a crisp official notary stamp. Brenda had not merely lied to a retail worker. She had committed felony forgery, likely utilizing one of Trent's shady real estate contacts to secure an illegitimate notary seal. The sheer arrogance of the act pulled a memory to the surface. When I was 19, I saved my wages from a campus coffee shop to buy a delicate silver watch for my college graduation. The week before the ceremony, the watch vanished from my bedroom. I later found it on Tiffany's wrist in a photograph from a weekend music festival. The glass face was scratched, the band permanently ruined. Brenda had defended the theft, claiming Tiffany needed accessories for her social media updates, and that I was being selfish for trying to hoard nice things. They viewed my possessions as a communal wardrobe, accessible whenever Tiffany required a prop. "What did she say she was doing with the dress?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. Geneviève swallowed hard. She asked for the contact information of a rapid alteration service down the street. She mentioned Tiffany needed a luxury white outfit for a milestone birthday photo shoot, and they planned to have the hem raised to the knee to create a cocktail dress. A sharp breath caught in my throat. They were going to hack an $8,000 custom bridal gown into pieces for Instagram engagement. I did not yell at Geneviève. Screaming at a manipulated retail owner served no tactical purpose. I simply pulled my phone from my purse, activated the camera, and took 3 clear, high-resolution photographs of the forged power of attorney document. I thanked Geneviève for her time, advised her to retain the original paper for future legal inquiries, and walked out of the store. I did not drive to my mother's house. Confronting Brenda in person would only give her the emotional reaction she craved. It would allow her to play the victim, twisting the narrative to make me look unhinged. Instead, I drove 3 miles down the road and parked in front of the local police precinct. The station lobby was stark, bathed in harsh fluorescent lighting and smelling faintly of floor wax and stale coffee. I walked up to the duty desk, produced my California identification card, and informed the officer that I needed to report a grand theft. The officer, a tired-looking man with graying hair, pulled out a notepad. He expected a routine story about a stolen catalytic converter or a misplaced purse. Instead, I provided a concise, chronological timeline of corporate fraud, identity theft, and the unlawful seizure of high-value property. I handed him the printed receipts, proving I was the sole purchaser of the gown. I showed him the photographs of the forged notary document. I explicitly pointed out that the monetary value of the stolen item far exceeded the state threshold for a felony charge. "Do you know the current location of the stolen property?" the officer asked, his demeanor shifting into sharp professional focus. "It is currently in the possession of my mother, Brenda, and my sister, Tiffany," I replied, giving him their exact residential address. He asked if I wanted to dispatch a patrol car to their house immediately to recover the item. The temptation was strong. I could picture the flashing blue lights pulling into Brenda's driveway, the public humiliation in front of her nosy neighbors, the sudden realization that her actions carried real-world penalties. But a premature strike would ruin the larger trap. Arresting them now would allow Trent to distance himself, claiming ignorance. I needed all of them to gather in one place, fully committed to their extortion scheme, before I pulled the floor out from under them. "No," I told the officer, "I do not want to press immediate charges or dispatch a unit today. I simply need to file the official report, establish the chain of evidence, and secure the felony case number on the record. I will pursue charges at a later date." The officer nodded, recognizing the methodical approach of someone building a larger legal strategy. 10 minutes later, I walked out of the precinct, holding a blue carbon copy of a formal police report. I had just weaponized their entitlement. The theft was no longer a family dispute. It was a documented state crime resting in my purse. I sat in the driver's seat of my car, the engine idling quietly. The setting sun cast long shadows across the pavement. I reached to put the car in gear, but my phone began to ring. The screen flashed with Brenda's name. I took a slow, deep breath, regulating my heart rate. I accepted the call, pressing the phone to my ear without saying a word. "Rashima, sweetheart," Brenda chirped. Her voice was dripping with a synthetic sugary sweetness that made my skin crawl. It was the exact tone she used whenever she knew she had crossed a line and wanted to manipulate her way out of the fallout. I remained silent, letting the dead air stretch. I know you might be feeling a little tense right now, she continued, completely unfazed by my lack of greeting. There have been some silly little misunderstandings today with the vendors and the schedules. Wedding planning is just so stressful, and I think we all let our emotions get the better of us. Silly little misunderstandings. That was how she categorized felony forgery and extortion. Trent and Tiffany want to clear the air, Brenda said, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. We are hosting a small, intimate peace dinner tomorrow night at the steakhouse downtown. We want you and Julian to come. We can sit down like adults, smooth over these minor bumps, and find a compromise that makes everyone happy for the weekend. She was orchestrating an ambush. Trent wanted me in a public setting to force my signature on the venue release, using the dinner as a stage to intimidate Julian and assert his dominance. They believed they held all the cards. They believed the stolen dress and the hijacked florist gave them absolute leverage over my decisions. They had no idea about the corporate compliance audit Julian was building. They had no idea about the blue police report sitting on my passenger seat. That sounds like a wonderful idea, I replied, my voice perfectly smooth, devoid of any anger or panic. Julian and I would love to attend. Oh, wonderful, Brenda sighed, the relief palpable in her voice. Wear something nice, darling. Trent is covering the bill, and the restaurant has a strict dress code. I will see you tomorrow, I said, and ended the call. I looked at the blue paper resting on the leather seat next to me. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and my family was eagerly walking straight into the jaws of their own destruction. The heavy oak doors of the downtown California steakhouse swung open, sealing out the warm evening breeze and replacing it with the rich, heavy scent of seared ribeye and expensive cedar wood. Dim amber lighting cast long shadows across the dining room, illuminating the dust motes dancing above polished mahogany tables. I walked beside Julian, the heels of my shoes clicking a steady, rhythmic cadence against the marble floor. My pulse remained remarkably slow. The blue, carbon copy of the police report rested securely inside the inner pocket of my leather handbag, an invisible shield against the impending ambush. Julian placed a reassuring hand on the small of my back as the hostess guided us toward a secluded circular booth in the back corner. He wore a crisp navy blazer over a simple white shirt, looking effortless and calm. He did not possess the frantic, desperate energy of a man trying to prove his worth. He already knew his value. Brenda, Tiffany, and Trent were already seated. They looked like a painted portrait of manufactured success. Trent wore a flashy, oversized silver watch that caught the ambient light, his posture wide and territorial as he draped one arm over the back of the leather booth. Tiffany sat beside him, dressed in a designer silk blouse, her makeup applied with meticulous precision to project the image of a thriving influencer. Brenda sat across from them, sipping sparkling water with a tight, expectant smile. They did not stand when we arrived. They merely shifted their gaze, their eyes filled with a toxic mixture of pity and triumph. They believed they held the executioner's sword. "Sit down," Trent commanded, waving a hand toward the empty side of the booth. He did not offer a greeting. He bypassed any pretense of hospitality and immediately signaled the waiter. "We already ordered the wine, a vintage Cabernet. It is a bit out of your usual price range, Julian, but consider it my treat. I want tonight to be a celebration of moving forward." Julian slid into the booth beside me. "Thank you, Trent," Julian said, his tone devoid of any offense. "That is very generous of you." The waiter arrived, uncorking the dark bottle with practiced efficiency. The dark crimson liquid poured into the crystal glasses, the sound crisp in the tense silence of our table. Trent waited until the server retreated before leaning forward, resting his elbows on the polished wood. He laced his fingers together, adopting the posture of a seasoned corporate negotiator dealing with a difficult subordinate. "Let us skip the pleasantries." Trent began swirling the wine in his glass. "Your mother explained the logistical nightmare you are facing with your wedding. You are stressed, the planning is unraveling, and the vineyard is frankly too large of a financial burden for a single-income household. Tiffany and I are willing to step in and absorb the liability." I stared at him, keeping my expression entirely neutral. You are offering to absorb the liability of a venue I booked and paid for almost a year ago, I clarified, letting the absurdity of his statement hang in the air. Trent sighed a sharp exhalation meant to convey exasperation. Do not play semantics, Rashima. We know you cannot afford the premium upgrades required to keep the reservation active. Tiffany has high-profile sponsors flying in. We need the pavilion. So we are offering you a clean exit strategy. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick manila folder. He dropped it onto the center of the table. The heavy paper landed with a dull thud. Trent slid the folder across the mahogany surface until it rested directly in front of my plate. I flipped open the cover. Inside sat a stack of legal documents printed on Trent's official corporate letterhead. The top page was a binding non-disclosure agreement. Beneath it lay a formal venue release contract, stipulating that I forfeit all rights claims and deposits associated with the Napa Valley estate, transferring full ownership of the weekend to Tiffany. Tucked under the final signature line was a certified bank check. It was made out to me in the amount of $5,000. This is a token of our appreciation, Trent declared, gesturing toward the paper. $5,000. You can use it to book a nice local banquet hall, maybe a public park pavilion. Sign the release, sign the NDA, promising you will not discuss this transition on social media, and you can walk away with cash in hand. If you refuse, I will make one phone call to my partners, and your auditing firm will realize they promoted a volatile liability. A fresh wave of irony washed over me. He was attempting to buy my $40,000 wedding venue with a $5,000 check, while simultaneously leveraging a threat against my career to force compliance. He was treating my life like a distressed commercial property he could acquire for pennies on the dollar. Tiffany leaned across the table, her bottom lip trembling. She had been waiting for her cue. As a waiter walked past our booth carrying a tray of appetizers, Tiffany let a single, calculated tear trace a path down her cheek. "Why are you always so difficult, Rashima?" Tiffany whimpered, ensuring her voice carried just enough volume to draw the attention of the adjacent tables. "I just want one special weekend for my birthday. You have always been so jealous of me. You are trying to ruin my life just because you are bitter." The waiter paused, glancing toward our table with a look of concern. Tiffany buried her face in her hands, sobbing softly into her palms. It was a flawless performance. When we were teenagers, she used this exact tactic in a crowded department store to force Brenda into buying her a designer handbag, crying until the store manager offered us a discount just to stop the public spectacle. Tiffany weaponized public discomfort, trusting that her target would surrender rather than endure the social embarrassment. Brenda reached over, patting Tiffany on the shoulder while glaring at me. "Look what you are doing to your sister," Brenda hissed. "You are being irrational and spiteful." I did not break character. I did not raise my voice or attempt to defend myself against the fabricated tears. I simply looked at my mother and waited for her to play her final card. Brenda turned her venomous gaze toward Julian. She looked him up and down, her eyes lingering on his unbranded blazer. "If you actually cared about my daughter, you would tell her to sign the papers," Brenda said, her words dripping with condescension. "But I suppose a nobody like you cannot afford to have an opinion. You cannot even afford to give her a proper wedding. You are letting her ruin her family relationships over a party neither of you can finance. A real man would guide his partner toward a logical compromise instead of sitting there like a silent accessory." The insult was designed to emasculate him, to provoke a reaction that would prove their perceived superiority. Brenda measured human worth entirely by bank account balances and ostentatious displays of wealth. She believed Julian was a failure because he did not brag, because he did not wear designer labels, and because he did not try to dominate the conversation. Julian did not flinch. He did not flush with anger or raise his voice to defend his honor. Instead, Julian reached out and picked up the non-disclosure agreement. He held the document up to the dim amber light, his dark eyes scanning the text. He did not read the terms of the agreement. His focus remained entirely fixed on the top corner of the page. He was staring at the corporate logo and the official letterhead of Trent's commercial real estate development firm. Julian let out a soft, low chuckle. The sound was genuine, lacking any trace of malice or forced bravado. It was the sound of a chess grandmaster watching his opponent confidently move their queen into a fatal trap. "This is your primary holding company?" Julian asked, his voice smooth and conversational, tapping his index finger against Trent's printed logo. Trent sneered, puffing out his chest. "Yes, that is the entity taking over the venue. My firm has more capital in a single escrow account than you will see in your entire lifetime. Now put the paper down and tell your fiancé to sign it." Julian smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile that instantly shifted the atmospheric pressure of the booth. The smug satisfaction began to drain from Trent's face, replaced by a flickering shadow of primal uncertainty. Julian lowered the NDA, placing it gently back onto the mahogany table. He reached inside the breast pocket of his navy blazer, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He bypassed his wallet, sliding his hand deeper into the tailored fabric. "Actually, Trent," Julian murmured, the quiet authority in his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the steakhouse, "I think you might want to review my paperwork first." Julian pulled a single, crisp document from his jacket and placed it directly on top of Trent's $5,000 check. The power dynamic in the room was about to permanently shatter, and the reality Trent had built his entire ego upon was seconds away from a catastrophic collapse. The item Julian placed on the table was not a legal brief or a counteroffer. It was a business card. The material was thick, matte black cardstock with subtle silver embossing. It landed directly over the signature line of Trent's $5,000 check. The dim amber lighting of the steakhouse caught the metallic lettering, illuminating a single, undeniable title. Julian Pierce, Founder and Chief Executive Officer, Apex Capital Cybersecurity. Trent stared at the rectangular piece of paper. The shift in his physiology was instantaneous and alarming. The smug, territorial expansion of his chest collapsed entirely. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray. His hand, which had been confidently swirling the vintage Cabernet moments prior, began to tremble so noticeably that the dark red liquid rippled against the crystal glass. Brenda squinted at the card. She lacked the corporate literacy to understand the gravity of the name printed on the cardstock. She scoffed, waving her hand in a dismissive theatrical gesture. "Is this some kind of joke?" Brenda asked, her tone dripping with unearned superiority. "Are you trying to impress us with a fake title from some tech startup? We are discussing real money here, Julian. We are talking about luxury estates and brand sponsorships, not your little freelance computer projects." Julian did not look at Brenda. He kept his dark eyes locked strictly on Trent. "Apex is not a startup," Julian said, his voice retaining that calm, modulated cadence. "We are the independent compliance firm retained by the Institutional Investor Board currently reviewing your stalled San Francisco downtown project. We are the architects of the algorithms assessing your debt-to-equity ratios. We hold the exclusive authority to certify your corporate ecosystem. That certification dictates whether your creditors release your next round of funding or if they recall your high-interest mezzanine loans and force your firm into liquidation." Trent stopped breathing. The reality of his situation crashed over him. He had spent the entire evening attempting to financially intimidate the one man who held the keys to his professional survival. Tiffany looked back and forth between the two men. She did not understand the financial jargon, but she recognized the stark terror radiating from her fiancé. "Trent, tell him to stop making things up," Tiffany whined, reaching out to tug on his tailored sleeve. "Tell him to sign the venue release. My sponsors need confirmation tonight. We have a timeline." "Shut up, Tiffany," Trent hissed. His voice was raw, stripped of its previous arrogant polish. It was the sound of a man staring into the abyss of his own ruin. Tiffany flinched, pulling her hand back as if she had been burned. Her performative tears vanished, replaced by a look of genuine shock. Trent had never spoken to her like that. He had always played the role of the generous benefactor. Now faced with true power, his loyalty evaporated. Julian leaned back against the leather booth, folding his hands resting on the mahogany table. At 4 o'clock this afternoon, Julian continued the quiet authority in his voice, cutting through the ambient noise of the restaurant. You utilized your primary corporate email server to transmit a documented threat to my fiancé. You demanded the surrender of a $40,000 asset. You explicitly stated your intention to leverage your executive connections to sabotage her career if she refused. In the corporate compliance sector, we define that behavior as documented financial coercion. Julian explained, sending an extortion demand using company infrastructure while under an active federal-level review is a fatal error. Our diagnostic software flagged the communication the moment it hit Rishima's encrypted inbox. The violation report auto-generated 30 minutes later. It has already been routed directly to your investor board. Trent lunged forward in a blind panic. His elbow struck his crystal wine glass. The goblet tipped, spilling the dark red vintage across the pristine white tablecloth. The stain spread rapidly, soaking into the fabric like a digital red flag bleeding across a balance sheet. He scrambled to gather the non-disclosure agreement and the venue release, snatching his $5,000 check as if hiding the physical paper would somehow erase the digital footprint of his crime. "Julian, please." Trent stammered his words, stumbling over each other in a desperate rush. It was a misunderstanding, a terrible joke. The stress of the construction delays and the birthday planning clouded my judgment. I will withdraw the request. Rishima can keep the vineyard. I will write a check right now to cover all her catering upgrades. Just recall the compliance report. You are the chief executive. You have the administrative power to delete the flag. I watched the flashy real estate developer beg. For years, I had believed that power was loud. My mother screamed when she wanted obedience. Tiffany cried in public spaces to extract concessions. They operated on the assumption that whoever made the most noise held the most authority. They were profoundly wrong. True power was quiet. True power was a single email routed to the correct secure server. True power was Julian Pierce watching a bully drown in his own hubris. I do not alter diagnostic reports to protect unethical executives, Julian said, his expression devoid of pity. My firm operates on strict transparency. That is why your investors hired us. You attempted to leverage your perceived wealth to crush someone you thought was defenseless. You miscalculated the target. Trent turned his panicked gaze toward me, searching for mercy. When he found none in my eyes, his survival instinct kicked in, overriding any affection he held for my sister. "This was their idea," Trent blurted out, pointing a trembling finger at Tiffany and Brenda. "Tiffany told me you were unstable. Brenda is the one who forged the documents to steal your dress today. I just provided the capital. I am a victim of their manipulation, Julianne. I had no idea they were committing fraud." Tiffany gasped, the betrayal hitting her like a physical blow. "You are blaming me?" she shrieked, her carefully curated influencer persona shattering into pieces. Brenda finally grasped that the dynamic had shifted. She realized the wealthy developer she had bet her daughter's future on was currently groveling to the man she had dismissed as a nobody. She shifted tactics instantly, attempting to deploy the only weapon she had left. "Julian, Rishima, let us calm down," Brenda pleaded, her fake sweet tone returning. "We are family. Family forgives. We can fix this over dessert. There is no need to involve investors or ruin a man's career over a wedding venue." I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life taking my stability for granted. I thought about the forged power of attorney sitting in the bridal boutique and the blue police report resting safely inside my handbag. "There is nothing left to fix," I said. My voice was steady, devoid of the suffocating panic she used to trigger in me. I slid out of the leather booth, picking up my purse. I did not raise my voice. I did not list her crimes or demand an apology. I simply removed my presence from her table. Julian stood beside me. He looked down at the ruined tablecloth, the spilled wine dripping onto the dark wood floor. "Keep your $5,000, Trent Julian advised, buttoning his navy blazer. "You are going to need it to pay your bankruptcy attorneys." We turned our backs on the table and walked toward the heavy oak doors of the steakhouse. The silence we left behind was heavy and terrified. Nobody followed us. Nobody shouted our names to demand we return. The illusion of their superiority had shattered, leaving them trapped in the wreckage of their own arrogance. We stepped out into the cool California night. The valet brought our sedan around the circular drive. As Julian opened the passenger door for me, the screen of my phone illuminated inside my purse. The device began to vibrate, signaling the arrival of the first of 47 frantic voicemails. Trent was about to explain the true magnitude of his ruin to my family, and my mother was about to realize that her golden child's milestone birthday party was now unfunded, unprotected, and heading for a spectacular collapse. The tires of our sedan hummed against the asphalt as Julian drove us down the Pacific Coast Highway. The ocean spread out to our right, a vast expanse of ink-black water meeting a starless sky. Inside the cabin, the dashboard cast a soft blue glow. The silence between us was comfortable, rooted in the shared understanding of a successful extraction. I leaned my head against the cool leather of the passenger seat, watching the blurry headlights of oncoming traffic. Then, the digital display on the center console lit up. A notification pinged, signaling a new voicemail. 30 seconds later, another chime followed, then a third. The barrage had officially begun, circling back to the exact scenario I described at the beginning of this story. My mother was dialing my number repeatedly, leaving audio messages when I refused to answer. The digital counter on my screen ticked upward in rapid succession. 10, 20, 35. By the time we merged onto the exit ramp heading toward our neighborhood, the notification bubble rested at 47. I reached forward and tapped the infotainment screen, routing the audio playback through the car speakers. I wanted to hear the evolution of their panic. The first few recordings were exactly what I expected. Brenda was indignant, operating on the lingering fumes of her shattered ego. She demanded I turn the car around immediately and apologized to Trent for embarrassing him in a public setting. She called Julian disrespectful. She insisted the evening was supposed to be a compromise and accused me of ruining the family peace. By the 12th message, the tone shifted. The indignation dissolved into bewildered confusion. The background noise of the steakhouse had been replaced by the muffled acoustics of a car interior. Brenda asked what Julian meant about the institutional investors. She questioned why Trent was suddenly yelling at his lawyers on the phone. By the 28th message, stark terror had set in. Trent had clearly explained the corporate reality to her. He had translated the financial jargon into blunt truths she could process. The next recording filled the quiet cabin of our sedan with the sound of my mother weeping. "Rashima, please pick up," Brenda begged, her voice trembling with a frantic, unmoored desperation. "We did not know. We had no idea. Julian was the chief executive of the compliance group. You have to tell him to stop the audit. Trent says his loans are going to default. Tiffany is going to lose everything. We are family, darling. Families make mistakes, but they forgive each other. Please, you have to fix this." I listened to the recording, watching the California coastline roll past my window. My mother was not apologizing for impersonating me. She was not expressing remorse for stealing my wedding dress or attempting to sabotage my marriage. She was apologizing because she had insulted a billionaire instead of a nobody. Her regret was entirely conditional, based solely on the balance sheet of the man she had tried to humiliate. My family measured human worth in leverage. They respected power, they respected capital, and they respected the capacity to inflict financial pain. Because I had spent my 20s serving as their quiet safety net, they believed I held no intrinsic value. They had assumed my kindness was a symptom of weakness. Now, faced with the overwhelming machinery of Julian's corporate authority, Brenda was suddenly desperate to invoke the sacred bond of family. It was a hollow plea, echoing in the dark car. I skipped forward to the final audio file. It was not a message from Brenda. It was a chaotic, fragmented recording initiated by Tiffany. She had likely grabbed her phone in a blind panic, accidentally hitting dial while the true aftermath unfolded around her. Through the static, I heard the sharp, shrill sound of my sister throwing a full-blown tantrum. Tiffany could not comprehend the magnitude of a federal compliance flag or a mezzanine loan default. Her worldview was restricted to brand sponsorships, aesthetic Instagram feeds, and the superficial validation of her birthday gala. "Trent, you promised me the pavilion," Tiffany shrieked in the background. "My sponsors are arriving on Thursday. You cannot just cancel the caterer. You told me you were going to handle Rashima. You said you had the money." Trent roared back, his voice guttural and dripping with contempt. "Forget the party, Tiffany. My entire development portfolio is frozen. My creditors are pulling their capital because your mother and your sister set me up. I am bleeding cash, and you are crying about a birthday cake. The funding is gone. I am calling the venue right now and pulling my credit card off the file. I am done." The audio captured the sound of a car door slamming, followed by Tiffany sobbing uncontrollably. The recording disconnected. The unholy alliance they had formed to dismantle my wedding had collapsed in under an hour. Trent, faced with total financial annihilation, possessed zero loyalty to my sister. He was a transactional predator, and the moment Tiffany stopped being an asset and became a liability, he severed the connection. He was stripping away the capital for her milestone event to preserve whatever scraps of his empire remained. Tiffany was left standing in the wreckage, suddenly realizing that her golden child status offered no protection against a frozen bank account. Julian pulled our sedan into the secure underground parking garage of our apartment building. The tires squeaked faintly against the polished concrete. He parked the car, killed the engine, and turned to look at me in the dim light of the cabin. He did not gloat. He did not celebrate the destruction of Trent's ego. He simply unbuckled his seatbelt and pulled his cell phone from his pocket. "There is one final procedural detail I need to handle," Julian stated, his voice returning to its steady, professional cadence. We walked toward the elevator bay. I watched him open his secure corporate email client. During the drive, I had assumed Julian would use his authority to personally oversee Trent's audit, ensuring the developer faced maximum penalties for his extortion attempt. I thought he would wield his power like a hammer. Instead, Julian drafted a brief, formal memorandum to the Executive Board of Apex Capital Cybersecurity. "I am filing an official recusal," Julian explained as the elevator doors slid open. We stepped inside, the mirrored walls reflecting our tired but peaceful expressions. He tapped the screen, finalizing the document. "I cannot objectively oversee the compliance review for Trent's development group. There is a clear conflict of interest due to his documented threats against my partner." I stared at him, momentarily confused. "You are stepping down from the audit?" I asked. Julian nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "If I oversee his ruin, Trent will hire defense attorneys to claim the audit was biased. He will argue that the compliance failure was a personal vendetta, not a legitimate financial assessment. He might even petition the institutional investors for a secondary review, claiming unfair treatment." The elevator chimed, arriving at our floor. We stepped out into the quiet, carpeted hallway. By recusing myself, Julian continued unlocking our front door. I maintain pristine ethical boundaries. My personal feelings are entirely removed from the equation. The investors cannot accuse our firm of bias, and Trent cannot use my involvement as a legal loophole. Julian pushed the door open, ushering me inside the sanctuary of our home. "So who is taking over the file?" I asked, placing my purse on the granite kitchen counter. Julian set his keys in the ceramic bowl near the entrance. I assigned the portfolio to our independent regulatory division operating out of the New York office. They are led by a former federal prosecutor. They have zero connection to California, zero knowledge of your family drama, and a notorious reputation for dismantling leveraged debt structures with zero mercy. They do not care about his apologies or his excuses. They only care about the numbers. And Trent's numbers are a catastrophic failure. It was a masterclass in corporate warfare. Julian had not merely struck back, he had engineered a scenario where Trent's destruction was executed by an impartial, unstoppable machine. Trent would be foreclosed upon not out of revenge, but out of pure clinical mathematics. I poured 2 glasses of water, handing one to Julian. The tension that had gripped my chest for weeks finally unspooled. We had secured the perimeter. We had survived the ambush. However, the fallout from Trent pulling his funding was about to trigger a new wave of chaos. Tiffany, stripped of her lavish venue and abandoned by her wealthy fiancé, was not going to quietly accept defeat. A golden child denied her spotlight is a dangerous entity. If she could not have a luxury birthday gala, she was going to make sure nobody else could celebrate either. She was already reaching for her phone, preparing to weaponize the only platform she still controlled, setting the stage for a digital smear campaign that would force me to deploy my final line of defense. The morning sun filtered through the wooden blinds of our bedroom, casting thin strips of pale light across the duvet. I woke up to a sound that was different from the frantic ringing of the previous night. It was a rapid, unending series of short digital chimes. The notification alert on my cell phone was triggering every 2 seconds, vibrating the device against the glass surface of my nightstand. I reached over and picked it up. The screen was overflowing with alerts from various social media applications. I had been tagged in hundreds of comments, direct messages, and shared posts. I unlocked a phone and tapped the primary notification. The application launched immediately, playing a video Tiffany had uploaded around 3 in the morning. She sat on the floor of her bedroom. The framing was a classic influencer aesthetic, designed to manufacture raw vulnerability. She wore an oversized beige sweater, her hair pulled into a messy knot. She wore no visible makeup, though the subtle sheen on her cheeks indicated a carefully applied cosmetic routine meant to simulate hours of weeping. A soft ring light reflected in her wide, tear-filled eyes. "Hey guys." Tiffany began, her voice trembling with a practiced, breathy hesitation. "I did not want to bring family drama onto this platform, but I am in a really dark place right now, and I need my community." She spent the next 4 minutes weaving a breathtaking tapestry of fiction. She painted herself as the devoted younger sister, trying to organize a simple birthday dinner, only to be subjected to relentless psychological torment. She claimed I was hoarding family resources and attempting to ruin her milestone celebration out of deep-seated jealousy. Then she escalated the narrative into dangerous territory. Tiffany looked directly into the camera lens, letting a single tear fall, and accused me of elder abuse. She told her hundreds of thousands of followers that I had locked our mother out of all wedding planning, isolated her from the family, and verbally attacked her when she tried to offer simple advice. She claimed Brenda was currently heartbroken and suffering due to my toxic, controlling behavior. The video already had 250,000 views. The local algorithm had pushed it to the top of the feed for anyone living in our California county. I opened the comments section. It was a digital firing squad. Strangers were calling me a narcissist. People with anonymous profiles suggested I deserved to be left at the altar. But the most revealing messages came from my own extended family. Aunts, distant cousins, and family friends who had not spoken to me in 5 years were suddenly filling my direct inbox. They called me a disgrace. They demanded I apologize to my mother. They acted as the self-appointed enforcers of the family hierarchy, weaponizing their ignorance to defend the golden child. I locked the screen and placed the phone back on the nightstand. I sat on the edge of the mattress listening to the rhythmic hum of the central air conditioning. I waited for the familiar symptoms of family-induced panic to arrive. I expected my chest to tighten. I expected the heavy, suffocating weight of guilt to press down on my lungs. I expected the desperate urge to call everyone, to explain my side, to plead for their understanding. None of those physical reactions materialized. I felt a profound, unyielding stillness. It was a moment of crystalline clarity, a small pebble of realization dropping into the calm waters of my mind. I felt zero guilt. I experienced only the cold clinical detachment of a forensic auditor observing a failing asset. My sister had deployed her final desperate tactic, trusting that public shame would break my resolve. She did not realize she had just handed me the written evidence required to dismantle her primary source of income. Julian walked into the bedroom carrying 2 mugs of dark roast coffee. He took one look at my face, set the mugs on the dresser, and picked up my phone. He watched the video in silence, his expression hardening into a familiar, unreadable mask. "She's trying to flood the zone," Julian noted, setting the device down. She wants you busy fighting a public relations battle so you do not focus on the actual crimes they committed yesterday. We are not fighting a public relations battle, I replied, standing up and reaching for my laptop. We are building a digital firewall. I carried my computer into the home office. I did not log on to social media to post a defense. Arguing with internet strangers and manipulated relatives would only feed the algorithm and legitimize Tiffany's narrative. Instead, I opened the encrypted folder labeled Event Breach. I reviewed my inventory of evidence. I had the official Internet Protocol logs from the florist and the catering company, proving unauthorized cyber impersonation originating from my mother's residential network. I had the high-resolution photograph of the forged power of attorney document from the bridal boutique, bearing a fraudulent notary stamp. Most importantly, I had the blue carbon copy of the formal police report establishing an active felony investigation for the grand theft of an $8,000 custom gown. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct line for Marcus, a senior litigator who frequently partnered with my corporate auditing firm. Marcus was a legal architect who specialized in rapid risk mitigation. I explained the situation, outlining the timeline of the theft, the forgery, and the morning defamation campaign. I can draft a standard cease and desist order and serve it to your sister before noon. Marcus suggested the sound of his keyboard clacking through the receiver. We can demand she remove the video under threat of a civil suit for libel. No, I countered, staring at the paused frame of Tiffany's crying face on my secondary monitor. If we send a legal threat directly to Tiffany, she will just film another video. She will wave the legal paper in front of her ring light and claim her wealthy, abusive sister is trying to silence her with expensive lawyers. It will just generate more content for her channel. What is the alternative target? Marcus asked, his tone shifting into a sharper, more strategic gear. I opened Tiffany's social media profile and navigated to her recent promotional posts. The lifeblood of an influencer is not their audience. The audience is merely the product they sell. The true lifeblood is the corporate sponsorships funding their lifestyle. Target her revenue stream, I instructed. Tiffany tagged 3 primary sponsors in her upcoming birthday promotional materials: a boutique hotel chain, a luxury skincare brand, and an organic energy drink company. These are corporate entities bound by strict compliance guidelines and morals clauses. I understand, Marcus murmured, a hint of professional admiration entering his voice. Corporate brands abhor legal liabilities. Draft 3 separate legal packets, I directed. Do not frame them as threats. Frame them as professional risk advisories. Inform the compliance officers at these 3 brands that their sponsored affiliate Tiffany is currently a named party in an active police investigation for felony grand theft and identity fraud. State that she is actively utilizing their sponsored platforms to spread documented defamation in an attempt to cover up corporate extortion. I attached the relevant files to an encrypted email and forwarded them to Marcus. Include the police report case number, I added. Include the photograph of the forged legal document. Let them know that any continued financial association with her upcoming birthday event could be construed as funding a party built on stolen assets. Consider it done, Marcus confirmed. The packets will hit their corporate legal departments via certified digital delivery within the hour. I ended the call and leaned back in my chair. Julien placed a fresh mug of coffee on my desk, his eyes reflecting the quiet satisfaction of a perfectly executed strategy. We did not need to scream our truth into the void of the internet. We simply routed the undeniable facts to the people holding the purse strings. While Tiffany spent her morning basking in the glow of her viral fame, refreshing her feed to absorb the artificial sympathy of strangers, a very different reality was unfolding in 3 separate corporate boardrooms across the state. Legal departments do not care about tearful videos or family drama. They care about risk exposure. Sponsoring a young woman implicated in felony forgery and the theft of bridal property represented a catastrophic public relations hazard. I watched the clock on my computer screen calculating the inevitable delay between corporate decision-making and physical execution. 2 hours later, the digital firewall held firm, and the offensive strike landed with devastating precision. Tiffany had been posting rapid updates to her story, thanking her followers for their immense support. Then the updates abruptly stopped. A sudden, jarring silence fell over her digital presence. Her phone was no longer ringing with notifications from supportive fans. Her inbox was suddenly filling with urgent, stark emails from her talent management agency and her brand liaisons. The luxury skincare brand transmitted a formal notice of contract termination, citing an immediate breach of their morality and conduct clause. They demanded the removal of all associated promotional content within 24 hours. The boutique hotel chain, terrified of being linked to a police investigation, revoked her affiliate links and canceled the complimentary suite they had provided for her birthday weekend. The organic energy drink company issued an indefinite suspension, freezing her outstanding commission payments pending an internal review of the fraud allegations. Her corporate infrastructure evaporated in a matter of minutes. The validation she craved from the internet could not pay for a luxury venue. The tears she shed for the camera could not undo the cold, hard reality of a canceled contract. Trent had abandoned her the night before, taking his massive financial safety net with him. Now her independent revenue was gone, severed by the very corporate risk protocols she had spent her life mocking. The elaborate milestone birthday party was less than 48 hours away. She had no venue, no catering, no sponsors, and no wealthy fiancé to bail her out. The illusion she had sacrificed my sanity to build was crumbling around her, setting the stage for a desperate, frantic scramble to keep the house of cards standing. The financial sector operates on rumors, but it executes on verified data. By noon on Wednesday, the Independent Regulatory Division in New York delivered their preliminary risk assessment regarding Trent and his sprawling real estate portfolio. The results did not remain internal for long. When institutional investors sense a fatal vulnerability, they move with ruthless speed to protect their capital. Julian and I sat in our home office, monitoring the digital fallout on our respective monitors. The structural integrity of Trent's empire was dissolving in real time. A prominent California commercial real estate journal published a breaking news alert just after lunch. The headline confirmed that the primary backers for the stalled San Francisco downtown project had formally withdrawn their funding commitments. The article cited sudden, severe compliance red flags and documented executive misconduct. Without that crucial injection of capital, Trent could not service his high-interest mezzanine loans. The default clauses triggered automatically. Across the state, municipal work permits were suspended. Chain-link fences were padlocked at his active construction sites. The subcontractors, realizing the money had evaporated, packed up their heavy machinery and abandoned the lots. Trent had spent years cultivating an image of untouchable prosperity, bullying service workers and threatening local vendors. Now his creditors were stripping his assets down to the copper wiring. Simultaneously, Tiffany was experiencing her own rapid descent into obscurity. Her carefully curated influencer career imploded with staggering efficiency. Modern American corporate brands spend millions of dollars protecting their public image. They refuse to associate with individuals facing potential felony charges, especially charges involving grand theft and identity fraud. Following the cease and desist notices my attorney delivered, her inbox became a graveyard of terminated contracts. I watched the destruction unfold on my screen, feeling a profound sense of clarity. The narrative surrounding estrangement often dictates that the person setting the boundary is responsible for the ensuing chaos. But I did not destroy their lives. I did not hack my sister's social media accounts to post offensive material. I did not fabricate financial records to trick Trent's investors. I merely stepped aside. I stopped acting as their human shield. Their own staggering arrogance, combined with their documented unethical behavior, supplied the gravity for their fall. They built a house of cards on a foundation of fraud, and I simply refused to hold the walls up anymore. Desperation breeds reckless strategy. Realizing that her daughter was losing her sponsors and her future husband was facing bankruptcy, my mother decided to launch a counterattack. She believed she could still force me into submission by jeopardizing the one thing I valued most, my career. My desk phone chimed, displaying an internal extension. It was Diane, the director of human resources for my auditing firm. Her assistant requested my immediate presence in the executive conference room on the 9th floor. I left my home office, changed into a tailored charcoal blazer, and drove to the corporate headquarters in downtown San Jose. The air conditioning in the glass-paneled conference room hummed quietly. Diane sat at the head of a long mahogany table, her expression neutral but weary. A thick file folder rested in front of her. "Rashima, thank you for coming in on such short notice." Diane began gesturing for me to sit. We received a very troubling phone call on the anonymous corporate ethics hotline this morning. I took a seat, crossing my legs and folding my hands on my lap. I am assuming the caller identified herself as a concerned citizen reporting a case of severe elder abuse and emotional volatility. I replied, my voice perfectly steady. Diane blinked, caught off guard by my casual anticipation of the charges. The caller refused to leave a name, but she claimed you were utilizing your corporate resources to illegally freeze an elderly relative's bank accounts. Diane explained, reading from a printed transcript. The caller suggested you were mentally unstable and represented a severe liability to our firm's reputation. Under normal circumstances, an allegation of this nature requires an immediate administrative suspension, pending an internal review. My mother had overplayed her hand. Brenda assumed corporate HR departments functioned like family gossip circles, where whoever cried the loudest won the argument. She did not understand the rigorous documentation protocols embedded in the auditing industry. Diane, please open the internal legal drive and search for a personnel file I submitted 48 hours ago, I instructed calmly. The reference code is under hostile family disclosure. Diane typed the query into her laptop. Her eyes scanned the screen as the encrypted file unlocked. I had not waited for Brenda to strike. The moment Trent threatened my employment in his extortion email, I preemptively submitted a comprehensive security disclosure to my firm's legal team. The file contained a redacted copy of Trent's corporate threat, the IP logs from the vendor hijacking, and the official police report case number documenting the theft of my wedding gown. The caller was my mother, Brenda, I clarified, watching Diane's posture relax as she reviewed the verified legal documents. My family is currently attempting to extort a luxury wedding venue from me to fund a birthday party. When I refused to surrender my contracts, they escalated to identity theft and felony forgery. I filed the proactive disclosure to ensure the firm was protected against any retaliatory slander campaigns. Diane closed the laptop, letting out a long, slow breath. The tension in the room evaporated. She recognized the situation for what it was, a desperate, unhinged relative attempting to weaponize a corporate hotline. Your proactive risk management is exactly why you are one of our top senior auditors, Diane said, sliding the printed transcript of Brenda's call into a shredder bin. The complaint is dismissed as a frivolous domestic retaliation tactic. We will flag the incoming phone number and block any further communication from that origin point. I thanked Diane, shook her hand, and walked out of the conference room. Brenda had fired her best shot, aiming directly for my livelihood, and the bullet had simply bounced off my corporate armor. Her attempt at damage control was pathetic, useless, and ultimately self-defeating. By the time I returned to my car in the parking garage, the overlapping conflicts converging upon my family reached their breaking point. My phone vibrated with a news alert forwarded by Julian. Trent had realized that silent compliance was no longer an option. His investors demanded blood, and he needed a public scapegoat to salvage whatever meager scraps of his reputation remained. He bypassed the private phone calls and went straight to the media. His commercial real estate firm published a formal press release across all their social media channels and corporate communication platforms. The statement was brutal, drafted by ruthless public relations managers trying to stop a financial hemorrhage. Trent officially announced the immediate dissolution of his engagement to Tiffany, but he did not stop at a generic statement about irreconcilable differences. He explicitly threw my mother and my sister under the bus. The press release stated that Trent had recently uncovered severe, unauthorized vendor manipulation and forged legal documents orchestrated by his former partner and her mother. He claimed he was an unwitting victim of their fraudulent schemes, terminating the relationship to maintain his strict adherence to ethical business practices. It was a masterclass in shifting blame. Trent, the man who had tried to extort a venue using his corporate letterhead, was now publicly painting himself as a naive martyr, manipulated by two scheming women. The betrayal was total and devastating. He severed the financial artery keeping Tiffany's lifestyle afloat, leaving her to take the public fall for the crimes they had committed together. The family structure had completely disintegrated. The toxic alliance formed to steal my joy collapsed under the weight of its own greed. They had turned on each other the moment the consequences became real, proving that their bond was never rooted in love, but in mutual exploitation. I sat in the driver's seat listening to the muffled sounds of the parking garage and looked at the calendar application on my phone. Tiffany's extravagant milestone birthday gala, the event they had sacrificed my sanity and their own freedom to secure, was exactly 48 hours away. She had no luxury pavilion because Trent pulled his titanium credit card. She had no catering or flowers because I had locked down the vendor portals. She had no brand sponsors to provide free merchandise, and she no longer had a wealthy fiancé to foot the bill. Her social media followers were currently reading Trent's press release, watching her reputation burn to ash in real time. The event was entirely unfunded. The carefully constructed aesthetic was gone. My mother and sister were staring down the barrel of a weekend that was supposed to cement their social superiority, only to realize they were holding empty hands. The collision course was set, and the resulting disaster was going to force my mother to try one last desperate maneuver to survive the wreckage. Thursday evening brought a rare, quiet stillness to our California neighborhood. The coastal fog began rolling in over the hills, cooling the pavement and casting a muted gray filter across the sky. I stood in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner, finding a strange comfort in the rhythmic sound of the knife striking the wooden cutting board. Julian was down the hall in his study taking a final conference call for the day. The corporate storm we had unleashed upon Trent was currently raging across financial news outlets. But inside our home, the atmosphere felt remarkably secure. Then the doorbell chimed. It was not a frantic pounding or a demanding sequence of rings. It was a single, hesitant tone that echoed through the quiet foyer. I set the knife down, wiped my hands on a towel, and walked toward the front entrance. I activated the security tablet mounted on the wall to view the exterior camera feed. Brenda stood on the porch. The woman staring into the camera lens bore very little resemblance to the arrogant matriarch who had orchestrated a fake peace dinner just 48 hours prior. The polished, untouchable facade had crumbled. Her shoulders slumped under the weight of an invisible burden. Her hair lacked its usual immaculate volume, and her designer trench coat looked wrinkled as if she had been sitting in her car for hours trying to muster the courage to approach my door. She looked diminished, aged by the sudden evaporation of her borrowed power. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy oak door open. I did not step aside to invite her inside. I remained planted on the threshold, letting the cool ocean breeze drift between us. Rashima Brenda said, her voice lacking its characteristic sharp edge. She offered a fragile, trembling smile that failed to reach her eyes. I did not return the greeting. I simply waited, watching her struggle to formulate a sentence without her usual arsenal of intimidation tactics. I came to negotiate a truce. Brenda began clutching her leather handbag tightly against her stomach. This whole situation has gotten out of hand. Trent is facing bankruptcy, and he officially called off the engagement. Tiffany is devastated. She will not stop crying, and her sponsors have abandoned her. The birthday gala is practically ruined. She paused, searching my face for a flicker of sympathy. When my expression remained clinical and detached, she swallowed hard and pushed forward with her proposal. I am willing to make this right, Brenda promised, adopting the tone of a generous diplomat offering a sweeping concession. If you can fix this, I will personally guarantee that you get your peaceful wedding. I will return your custom dress tomorrow morning, fully intact. I will call all your aunts and cousins and tell them to stop harassing you online. I will allow you to have your special day without any further interruptions." I stared at her, genuinely fascinated by the depths of her delusion. Even now, standing in the wreckage of her own schemes, she believed she held the high ground. She genuinely thought she possessed the authority to grant me permission to marry my fiancé. "And what is the price for this generous truce?" I asked, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. Brenda leaned closer, lowering her voice as if sharing a corporate secret. "You just need to tell Julian to call off his attack dogs. Tell him to reverse the compliance audit and restore Trent's funding. If Trent gets his investor capital back, he will take Tiffany back. The engagement will be saved, the birthday party can proceed, and our family can go back to normal. Everyone wins." The audacity of her request hung in the damp evening air. She wanted me to leverage my partner's professional integrity to bail out a fraudulent developer, simply so my sister could retain her status symbol of a relationship. Brenda viewed Julian not as a human being, but as a utility switch she could flip to restore power to her golden child. "My dress is currently categorized as stolen evidence in an active felony investigation," I replied, keeping my posture rigid. "Returning it does not erase the forgery you committed. Telling our relatives to stop harassing me does not erase the defamation campaign Tiffany launched. You are attempting to trade stolen goods and basic human decency for a multi-million-dollar corporate bailout." Brenda flinched, the harsh legal terms piercing her carefully constructed narrative. "Rishima, please," she whispered, the diplomatic facade cracking. "Trent is going to lose his company." "Julian does not control the audit anymore," I explained, delivering the logistical reality with icy precision. "He recused himself last night. The file was transferred to an independent regulatory division in New York. The people reviewing Trent's portfolio do not know you. They do not care about Tiffany's birthday, and they cannot be bribed, coerced, or manipulated. The financial freeze is permanent until the investigation concludes." Brenda shook her head, refusing to process the information. "No, Julian is the chief executive. He can make one phone call. He can stop this if you just ask him to." "Even if he possessed that power," I said, maintaining direct eye contact, "I would never ask him to rescue a man who threatened my career. I would never ask him to compromise his ethics to save a relationship built on extortion. Trent is facing the mathematics of his own poor decisions." Panic flared in Brenda's eyes. The realization that she possessed zero leverage finally began to settle in. Desperate people rely on familiar weapons when their new tactics fail. She reached for the oldest, heaviest bludgeon in her emotional arsenal. "I am your mother," Brenda cried, tears spilling over her lower lashes. "I gave you life. I raised you. You owe me your loyalty. You cannot just abandon your own blood when we are suffering. After everything I have done for you, this is how you repay me? You owe this family." For the first 30 years of my life, that phrase would have paralyzed me. The concept of an unpayable maternal debt had been drilled into my psyche since childhood. It was the invisible chain she used to yank me back into compliance whenever I tried to step away. But standing on the porch, feeling the solid wood of my own home beneath my hand, the chain finally shattered. "I do not owe you anything," I stated the words, ringing clear and true in the evening air. Brenda gasped, pressing a hand to her chest as if I had struck her. "Let us balance the ledger. Right now," I continued, my voice steady, slicing through her performative sorrow. "When I was 25, I liquidated my retirement savings to stop the bank from foreclosing on your house. When I was 27, I funded Tiffany's entire equipment setup because you demanded I support her dreams. I paid your credit card bills when you secretly opened accounts using my Social Security number. I sacrificed my time, my savings, and my peace of mind to serve as the invisible shock absorber for every mistake you and Tiffany ever made." Brenda opened her mouth to argue, but I did not give her the space to interrupt. "I paid for my own college tuition. I built my own career. I funded my own wedding. The debt you claim I owe was paid in full years ago, subsidized by my stolen youth and my drained bank accounts. You did not come here today because you love me. You came here because your preferred daughter is experiencing discomfort, and you expect me to throw myself onto the tracks to stop her train from crashing. But she is your sister, Brenda sobbed, grasping at the final threads of her argument. You are ruining her life over a venue deposit. I am not ruining anything, I corrected her. I simply stopped fixing it. You confuse self-respect with revenge. I did not force Trent to falsify his corporate permits. I did not force you to impersonate me to the florist. I did not force Tiffany to post defamatory lies on the internet. Every single consequence raining down on your lives right now is the direct result of your own arrogant choices. I watched her face crumble. The truth is a relentless force, and she had spent decades hiding from it. Consequences are not revenge, I told her, my tone softening into a quiet, definitive finale. They are just reality catching up to you. I am no longer your safety net. You and Tiffany are going to have to learn how to survive the real world without using my wallet or my sanity as a shield. Rashima, wait, Brenda pleaded, reaching a hand toward the door frame. Do not do this. You no longer have access to my life, I said. I stepped back into the foyer and pushed the heavy oak door closed. The latch clicked into place. I reached up and turned the deadbolt, the mechanical sound echoing with profound finality. I stood in the entryway for a long moment, listening to the muffled sound of my mother weeping on the front porch. I expected the familiar rush of guilt to overtake me. I braced myself for the hollow ache of estrangement. Instead, a sensation of immense, staggering lightness washed over my entire body. The suffocating weight I had carried since childhood evaporated into the cool air. Julian walked out of his study, pausing at the end of the hallway. He looked at the locked door, then looked at me, a silent question in his posture. I smiled, taking a deep breath of clean, uninterrupted air. I walked back into the kitchen, picked up the knife, and resumed chopping the vegetables. I felt a profound, permanent sense of freedom. I had finally drawn the line, and the fortress was secure. Outside, my mother eventually retreated to her car, driving back to a reality where the bill was finally coming due. In less than 24 hours, the sun would rise on the day of Tiffany's extravagant milestone birthday. But without the stolen venue, without the corporate sponsors, and without Trent's vanished fortune, the dawn was going to illuminate a stage set for an unprecedented, spectacular disaster. Saturday dawned with a pristine, cloudless sky over the California coastline. I did not spend the morning of my sister's 27th birthday fielding frantic logistical phone calls, transferring emergency funds, or managing hostile vendors. Instead, Julian and I sat on our private balcony, drinking pour-over coffee and reading the weekend financial journals. The morning air smelled of salt spray and blooming jasmine. It was the exact kind of perfect sun-drenched afternoon Tiffany had spent 8 months visualizing for her luxury aesthetic. She had planned to spend this precise hour sipping vintage champagne in a bridal suite, surrounded by professional photographers and elaborate floral arrangements subsidized by my stolen venue deposit. I did not need to attend the event to witness the ensuing collapse. The modern digital age ensures that public humiliation broadcasts in real time, serving as an unblinking witness to the fallout. My phone began buzzing around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The notifications were not direct threats or demands for bailouts from my mother. They were rapid gossip updates from distant cousins and mutual acquaintances who had shown up for the promised lavish gala only to find themselves starring in a spectacular, unmitigated disaster. I pieced the timeline together through a series of text messages and leaked video clips sent by my cousin Sarah, who always possessed a talent for being in the right place to observe a catastrophe. According to Sarah, Brenda and Tiffany had arrived at the Napa Valley Vineyard Estate at noon, operating under the delusion that sheer entitlement could override a frozen bank account. They marched up to the luxury ballroom, expecting to find the suspended white orchids and artisanal catering stations I had originally designed. Instead, they found the grand mahogany doors locked tight. Marissa, the venue coordinator I had spoken to days earlier, stood in the cobblestone courtyard, flanked by 2 imposing private security guards. When Brenda demanded entry, assuming she could simply charm or intimidate her way past the staff, Marissa handed her a printed invoice. Because Trent had formally revoked his corporate card following Julian's compliance audit, and because I had legally secured my initial deposit through strict corporate lockdown procedures, the remaining balance for the pavilion rental was zero. The vendors for the champagne towers, the custom lighting, and the gourmet catering had demanded upfront cash upon arrival. Brenda, panicking under the gaze of arriving guests, tried to swipe 3 different personal credit cards to cover the immediate expenses. Every single transaction declined. Her accounts were maxed out from the high-interest loans she had co-signed to fund Tiffany's failed influencer lifestyle. The security personnel formally trespassed them from the estate. Tiffany threw a screaming fit in the gravel parking lot, ruining her carefully applied makeup with streaks of mascara, while wealthy vineyard patrons watched the meltdown from the elevated tasting room terrace. They were forced to retreat, scrambling to find an alternative location with less than 2 hours before the bulk of the guest list arrived. The pivot was as tragic as it was predictable. Desperate to salvage the milestone event and appease the few remaining local brand ambassadors who had not yet seen the brutal press release from Trent, Brenda redirected the attendees to a municipal park on the edge of town. It was a concrete pavilion situated next to a noisy public playground, featuring splintering wooden picnic tables and a charcoal grill covered in rust. The stark contrast between the promised luxury and the grim reality was breathtaking. Tiffany had mailed out gold foil invitations boasting about an exclusive botanical retreat and top-tier networking opportunities. The guests who actually showed up, wearing designer cocktail attire and expecting premium open bars, stepped out of their rideshare vehicles and stared at the dismal public park. There were no floral arches. There was no champagne tower. Brenda had rushed to a local grocery store, setting out plastic bowls of generic potato chips and lukewarm soda cans on a disposable plastic tablecloth that flapped in the ocean breeze. The influencer friends Tiffany had spent years cultivating took one look at the grim aesthetic and immediately told their drivers to keep the engines running. They were transactional creatures, driven entirely by the need to photograph themselves in high-value environments to maintain their own social currency. A concrete park bench next to a swing set offered zero promotional value. Within 30 minutes, the pavilion was virtually empty. Tiffany was left standing on the patchy grass, surrounded by a handful of confused, pitying relatives who only stayed out of morbid curiosity. The social isolation she had tried to inflict upon me had rebounded, trapping her in a prison of her own making. The most striking poetic detail of the afternoon arrived in a blurry photograph sent by Sarah. It centered on the outfit Tiffany was wearing to her ruined party. My mother had followed through on her plan to steal my $8,000 custom wedding gown and alter it into a birthday cocktail dress. But because Trent had severed her funding, Brenda could not afford the premium tailors required to handle imported French lace and delicate silk. She had taken the stolen garment to a cheap, rapid alteration kiosk in a strip mall, prioritizing speed over skill. The result was a textile massacre. The untrained seamstress had hacked the bottom half of the gown off, leaving a jagged, uneven hemline where the expensive silk threads were visibly fraying. The delicate structural boning in the bodice, designed meticulously for my exact measurements, buckled awkwardly against Tiffany's frame. It did not look like a high fashion statement. It looked like a cheap, ruined costume. The visual symbolism of the moment was profound. They had stolen my property, assuming they could seamlessly wear my success and my joy. But they lacked the foundation and the skill to hold it together. They had destroyed something beautiful, simply because they could not bear the thought of me having it. And in doing so, they had exposed their own underlying ugliness to the world. The sun began to set on the California coast, casting a twilight glow across our apartment living room. I scrolled through the final updates on my phone, feeling an unwavering clinical detachment. Tiffany and Brenda had dedicated their entire existence to the pursuit of appearances. They measured human value by the luxury of the venue, the price of the dress, and the perceived wealth of the men they stood beside. Now, stripped of the illusions they had financed with my stolen stability, They were left standing in a public park with nothing. No corporate sponsors, no wealthy fiancé to fund their whims, and no obedient sister to foot the bill. The public humiliation was total, born entirely from their own unchecked greed. The collapse of the birthday gala marked the definitive end of their reign of entitlement. They had fallen into a trap of their own design, and the resulting silence from my phone indicated they finally understood the ironclad boundaries I had drawn. The path was clear for my own wedding to proceed without the suffocating shadow of their demands. But surviving the destruction of a toxic family system is rarely a clean exit. Desperation breeds erratic behavior, and knowing that my flawless, secure ceremony was rapidly approaching, the crushing financial ruin surrounding my mother was bound to force her into one final, reckless collision course with my new reality. The silence was not a surrender. It was merely the deep breath before the final plunge. 3 weeks after the dismal failure in the public park, the coastal fog burned off early, revealing a pristine, sunlit morning. The contrast between my sister's chaotic collapse and the dawn of my actual wedding day was staggering. We had secured a breathtaking cliffside estate in Carmel, a location characterized by towering Monterey pines and the rhythmic, unyielding crash of the Pacific Ocean against ancient rocks. There were no frantic logistical scrambles, no tearful demands for emergency funding. The morning unfolded with the quiet, deliberate precision of a flawlessly executed corporate merger, subsidized entirely by the hard-earned capital Julian and I had built. I stood in the center of the bridal suite, surrounded by wide windows overlooking the sprawling, manicured lawns. The air smelled of salt spray and fresh eucalyptus. Genevieve, the boutique owner, who had witnessed my mother forge the theft of my original gown, had worked a minor miracle over the past month. She pulled favors with a bespoke designer in Milan, securing a replacement dress that rendered the stolen one entirely obsolete. The new garment was not crafted from delicate, fragile lace. It was constructed from heavy, architectural ivory Mikado silk. It featured a sharp, structural neckline and a flawless, sweeping train that moved with liquid grace. Stepping into it felt like donning elegant armor. It was unapologetic, refined, and possessed a weight that reminded me of my own resilience. Looking in the full-length mirror, I did not see the dependable, invisible daughter who used to absorb her family's debts. I saw a sovereign woman stepping confidently into a future she had engineered with her own hands. Outside on the terrace, the event logistics operated seamlessly. Discreet security personnel wearing tailored dark suits and communicating via earpieces monitored the perimeter. We had hired the exact premium catering team Brenda had attempted to hijack. Waitstaff circulated with trays of artisan flatbreads and chilled oysters, a sharp departure from the generic potato chips and lukewarm soda my mother had served on a plastic tablecloth. The guest list reflected the reality Julian and I had cultivated. There were no superficial influencers hunting for aesthetic backgrounds. There were no distant relatives whispering toxic gossip while drinking free liquor. The chairs were filled with chosen family. My mentors from the auditing firm sat near the front, laughing over glasses of vintage sparkling wine. Julian brought his inner circle from the cybersecurity conglomerate, brilliant analysts and compliance directors who swapped their usual rigid boardroom demeanors for genuine, warm celebration. These were people who valued transparency, who operated in the realm of verifiable facts, and who recognized that loyalty is earned through mutual respect, never demanded through genetic obligation. A string quartet positioned near the cliff edge began playing a sweeping modern arrangement on their cellos, signaling the start of the ceremony. I did not have anyone walk me down the aisle. For years, society had conditioned me to believe that a bride needed to be given away, handed from one family structure to another. But I did not belong to my mother, and I was not a piece of property to be transferred. I gripped my bouquet of white anemones and deep green ferns, took a steadying breath of the ocean air, and began the walk alone. Every step against the stone path belonged exclusively to me. As I approached the altar where Julianne waited, my eyes swept across the front row of seating on the left side of the aisle. 2 wooden folding chairs sat entirely empty. I had explicitly instructed the venue coordinator to leave them there. A traditional bride might have requested the seats be removed to hide the painful absence of her mother and sister. But I did not feel sorrow when I looked at the vacant space. I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of triumph. Those empty chairs were not a tribute to what I had lost. They were a monument to the peace I had finally secured. They represented the boundaries I had drawn, the extortion I had defeated, and the endless cycle of exploitation I had permanently broken. They stood as physical proof that I was willing to let people walk out of my life if they refused to respect my humanity. I smiled at the empty wood, feeling lighter than I had in 3 decades. Julian met my gaze as I reached the altar. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that highlighted the broad, grounded strength of his posture. The Pacific Ocean stretched out infinitely behind him, reflecting the clear, unapologetic truth of the day. He reached out, taking both of my hands in his. His palms were warm, anchoring me to the present moment. The officiant spoke beautifully about partnership and endurance, but the true emotional anchor of the ceremony rested in the vows we had written ourselves. When it was Julian's turn to speak, the ambient noise of the crashing waves seemed to fade into the background. Rashima Julian began his voice, carrying that familiar, quiet authority, yet softened by a deep, undeniable affection. For years, I watched you carry the weight of a world that refused to acknowledge your strength. I watched you shrink your own joy to accommodate the comfort of others. Today, I vow to never require you to make yourself smaller so I can feel tall. He paused, his dark eyes searching mine, ensuring every single word registered in my mind. I promise to be your partner in reality. Julian continued the cadence of his speech, steady and resolute. I will never ask you to accept the comfort of an illusion. I will stand beside you when the truth is difficult, and I will fiercely protect the sanctuary we have built together. You are the most brilliant, formidable woman I have ever known, and I am honored to spend my life verifying that fact every single day. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but they were not born of grief or manipulation. They were tears of profound catharsis. I delivered my vows with equal conviction, promising to share my authentic self without fear of exploitation. When the officiant finally pronounced us married, the applause that erupted from our guests was not a polite, obligatory smattering of clapping. It was a resonant, joyous roar from a community that genuinely celebrated our victory. The reception transitioned into a flawless, golden hour celebration. Strings of Edison bulbs illuminated the twilight sky as the sun sank below the horizon. The evening was a masterclass in safety and joy. I drank crisp champagne, danced with the senior partners from my firm, and watched Julian laugh freely with his compliance directors. There was no walking on eggshells. There was no monitoring the room for sudden dramatic outbursts or manufactured crises. I had spent my entire youth navigating emotional minefields, conditioned to believe that love was synonymous with perpetual anxiety. Standing on the hardwood dance floor, wrapped in Julian's arms, as a slow jazz melody drifted through the cool night air, I finally experienced the quiet miracle of a drama-free existence. We were wholly untethered from the toxic weight of my past, floating in a reality we had earned through strict boundaries and unrelenting truth. As the final song of the night began to play, Julian leaned down, pressing a warm kiss to my temple. I closed my eyes, savoring the feeling of the heavy silk gown swaying against my legs and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against my chest. The victory was comprehensive, beautiful, and deeply satisfying. However, escaping a parasitic family system rarely concludes with a clean fade to black. Desperate people, when backed into a corner of their own making and stripped of their resources, do not simply vanish into the ether. They lash out. They search for any remaining vulnerability in the fortress walls. I opened my eyes, glancing over Julianne's shoulder toward the edge of the illuminated terrace. Marcus, the lead security director for the estate, was standing near the stone archway that led to the private access road. He was not observing the dancing guests. He was pressing 2 fingers against his earpiece, his brow furrowed in sharp, sudden concentration. Marcus caught my eye across the crowded dance floor. He did not smile. He gave a subtle, tight nod. a gesture indicating that the perimeter had just been tested. The celebration was perfect, but the outside world was still out there, and the architects of my past were preparing to force one final desperate confrontation on the doorstep of my new life. The tires of our sedan hummed against the asphalt as Julian drove us down the Pacific Coast Highway. The ocean spread out to our right, a vast expanse of ink-black water meeting a starless sky. Inside the cabin, the dashboard cast a soft blue glow. The silence between us was comfortable, rooted in the shared understanding of a successful extraction. I leaned my head against the cool leather of the passenger seat, watching the blurry headlights of oncoming traffic. Then the digital display on the center console lit up. A notification pinged, signaling a new voicemail. 30 seconds later, another chime followed. Then a third. The barrage had officially begun, circling back to the exact scenario I described at the beginning of this story. My mother was dialing my number repeatedly, leaving audio messages when I refused to answer. The digital counter on my screen ticked upward in rapid succession. 10, 20, 35. By the time we merged onto the exit ramp, heading toward our neighborhood, the notification bubble rested at 47. I reached forward and tapped the infotainment screen, routing the audio playback through the car speakers. I wanted to hear the evolution of their panic. The first few recordings were exactly what I expected. Brenda was indignant, operating on the lingering fumes of her shattered ego. She demanded I turn the car around immediately and apologized to Trent for embarrassing him in a public setting. She called Julian disrespectful. She insisted the evening was supposed to be a compromise and accused me of ruining the family peace. By the 12th message, the tone shifted. The indignation dissolved into bewildered confusion. The background noise of the steakhouse had been replaced by the muffled acoustics of a car interior. Brenda asked what Julian meant about the institutional investors. She questioned why Trent was suddenly yelling at his lawyers on the phone. By the 28th message, stark terror had set in. Trent had clearly explained the corporate reality to her. He had translated the financial jargon into blunt truths she could process. The next recording filled the quiet cabin of our sedan with the sound of my mother weeping. "Reshima, please pick up," Brenda begged, her voice trembling with a frantic, unmoored desperation. We did not know. We had no idea Julian was the chief executive of the compliance group. "You have to tell him to stop the audit. Trent says his loans are going to default. Tiffany is going to lose everything." "We are family, darling. Families make mistakes, but they forgive each other. Please, you have to fix this." I listened to the recording, watching the California coastline roll past my window. My mother was not apologizing for impersonating me. She was not expressing remorse for stealing my wedding dress or attempting to sabotage my marriage. She was apologizing because she had insulted a billionaire instead of a nobody. Her regret was entirely conditional, based solely on the balance sheet of the man she had tried to humiliate. My family measured human worth in leverage. They respected power, they respected capital, and they respected the capacity to inflict financial pain. Because I had spent my 20s serving as their quiet safety net, they believed I held no intrinsic value. They had assumed my kindness was a symptom of weakness. Now, faced with the overwhelming machinery of Julian's corporate authority, Brenda was suddenly desperate to invoke the sacred bond of family. It was a hollow plea, echoing in the dark car. I skipped forward to the final audio file. It was not a message from Brenda. It was a chaotic, fragmented recording initiated by Tiffany. She had likely grabbed her phone in a blind panic, accidentally hitting dial while the true aftermath unfolded around her. Through the static, I heard the sharp, shrill sound of my sister throwing a full-blown tantrum. Tiffany could not comprehend the magnitude of a federal compliance flag or a mezzanine loan default. Her worldview was restricted to brand sponsorships, aesthetic Instagram feeds, and the superficial validation of her birthday gala. "Trent, you promised me the pavilion," Tiffany shrieked in the background. "My sponsors are arriving on Thursday. You cannot just cancel the caterer. You told me you were going to handle Reshima. You said you had the money." Trent roared back, his voice guttural and dripping with contempt. Forget the party, Tiffany. My entire development portfolio is frozen. My creditors are pulling their capital because your mother and your sister set me up. I am bleeding cash, and you are crying about a birthday cake. The funding is gone. I am calling the venue right now and pulling my credit card off the file. I am done. The audio captured the sound of a car door slamming, followed by Tiffany sobbing uncontrollably. The recording disconnected. The unholy alliance they had formed to dismantle my wedding had collapsed in under an hour. Trent, faced with total financial annihilation, possessed zero loyalty to my sister. He was a transactional predator, and the moment Tiffany stopped being an asset and became a liability, he severed the connection. He was stripping away the capital for her milestone event to preserve whatever scraps of his empire remained. Tiffany was left standing in the wreckage, suddenly realizing that her golden child status offered no protection against a frozen bank account. Julian pulled our sedan into the secure underground parking garage of our apartment building. The tires squeaked faintly against the polished concrete. He parked the car, killed the engine, and turned to look at me in the dim light of the cabin. He did not gloat. He did not celebrate the destruction of Trent's ego. He simply unbuckled his seatbelt and pulled his cell phone from his pocket. There is one final procedural detail I need to handle. Julian stated, his voice returning to its steady, professional cadence. We walked toward the elevator bay. I watched him open his secure corporate email client. During the drive, I had assumed Julian would use his authority to personally oversee Trent's audit, ensuring the developer faced maximum penalties for his extortion attempt. I thought he would wield his power like a hammer. Instead, Julian drafted a brief, formal memorandum to the executive board of Apex Capital Cybersecurity. I am filing an official recusal, Julian explained as the elevator doors slid open. We stepped inside the mirrored walls, reflecting our tired but peaceful expressions. He tapped the screen, finalizing the document. I cannot objectively oversee the compliance review for Trent's development group. There is a clear conflict of interest due to his documented threats against my partner. I stared at him momentarily confused. You are stepping down from the audit, I asked. Julian nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. If I oversee his ruin, Trent will hire defense attorneys to claim the audit was biased. He will argue that the compliance failure was a personal vendetta, not a legitimate financial assessment. He might even petition the institutional investors for a secondary review, claiming unfair treatment. The elevator chimed, arriving at our floor. We stepped out into the quiet, carpeted hallway. By recusing myself, Julian continued unlocking our front door. I maintain pristine ethical boundaries. My personal feelings are entirely removed from the equation. The investors cannot accuse our firm of bias, and Trent cannot use my involvement as a legal loophole. Julian pushed the door open, ushering me inside the sanctuary of our home. So who is taking over the file, I asked, placing my purse on the granite kitchen counter. Julian set his keys in the ceramic bowl near the entrance. I assigned the portfolio to our independent regulatory division operating out of the New York office. They are led by a former federal prosecutor. They have zero connection to California, zero knowledge of your family drama, and a notorious reputation for dismantling leveraged debt structures with zero mercy. They do not care about his apologies or his excuses. They only care about the numbers, and Trent's numbers are a catastrophic failure. It was a masterclass in corporate warfare. Julian had not merely struck back, he had engineered a scenario where Trent's destruction was executed by an impartial, unstoppable machine. Trent would be foreclosed upon not out of revenge, but out of pure clinical mathematics. I poured 2 glasses of water, handing one to Julian. The tension that had gripped my chest for weeks finally unspooled. We had secured the perimeter. We had survived the ambush. However, the fallout from Trent pulling his funding was about to trigger a new wave of chaos. Tiffany, stripped of her lavish venue and abandoned by her wealthy fiancé, was not going to quietly accept defeat. A golden child denied her spotlight is a dangerous entity. If she could not have a luxury birthday gala, she was going to make sure nobody else could celebrate either. She was already reaching for her phone, preparing to weaponize the only platform she still controlled. setting the stage for a digital smear campaign that would force me to deploy my final line of defense. The glass walls of my office on the 9th floor offered a sweeping, unobstructed view of the San Jose skyline. I stood by the window for a long time, watching the tiny vehicles navigate the grid of the city below. The frantic energy of the lobby confrontation felt miles away, separated from my sanctuary by layers of concrete steel and rigorous corporate security. I placed my hands flat against the cool glass. The faint vibration of the building's ventilation system hummed beneath my palms, a steady, predictable rhythm that mirrored my own slowing pulse. I thought about the sight of my mother and sister being guided through those heavy revolving doors. The security guards had not touched them roughly, nor had they raised their voices. They simply formed an impenetrable physical barrier, a walking boundary that escorted the chaos out of my professional environment. Watching the glass panels spin, sweeping Brenda and Tiffany out onto the sunlit pavement, I realized I was witnessing a profound metaphorical threshold. They were standing on the sidewalk, looking back up at a fortress they could no longer infiltrate. They had no leverage left to pull. They possessed no financial access to exploit. The power dynamic had not merely shifted, it had evaporated entirely. I walked back to my desk and sank into the leather chair. I took a deep, uninterrupted breath. The air in the office felt remarkably clean. For the first time in 33 years, the ledger was closed. There were no outstanding debts to calculate, no impending emotional disasters to mitigate, and no incoming extortion attempts to document. The book was shut, and the silence it left behind was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. We live in a society that places a heavy, unspoken burden on the shoulders of women, grooming us from childhood to serve as the designated fixers within our family systems. We are praised for being dependable. We are applauded for our maturity. We are handed the label of the responsible daughter, the reliable sister, the silent anchor in the storm. It sounds like a commendation, but it is too often a trap disguised as a compliment. It is a carefully constructed cage designed to ensure that when the toxic elements of a household drop their responsibilities, someone is always standing by to catch the falling debris. In these dysfunctional ecosystems, our inherent humanity is slowly replaced by our utility. We are not valued for our laughter, our dreams, or our independent achievements. We are valued for our capacity to absorb collateral damage. We become human shock absorbers, expected to flatten our own boundaries to cushion the impact of someone else's reckless choices. When you spend your entire life functioning as a utility, the people who rely on your sacrifices forget that you are a person. They begin to view your resources, your time, and your bank accounts as communal property, accessible on demand to fund their vanities or rescue them from their own ruin. This dynamic is sustained through the relentless weaponization of a single concept: family. It is a word that gets twisted into a tool of supreme compliance. When an entitled relative demands an unreasonable concession, they do not ask for a favor. They invoke the bloodline. They tell you that family requires infinite patience, endless forgiveness, and unconditional financial bailouts. But a structure built on unilateral exploitation is not a family. It is a hostage situation, holding your conscience for ransom. There is a distinct, undeniable difference between genuine connection and parasitic attachment. True family, whether biological or chosen, celebrates your autonomy. They rejoice in your stability. They do not view your success as a resource reservoir waiting to be tapped. Parasites, on the other hand, view your independence as a threat. They use love as a currency, offering affection only when you comply with their demands, and withdrawing it the moment you establish a boundary. They demand that you prove your loyalty by participating in your own destruction. For years, I operated under a flawed definition of strength. I believed that resilience was measured by how much pain I could endure without breaking. I thought courage meant standing in the fire and refusing to burn, shielding the people who had struck the match. I was conditioned to view surrender as a failure. But enduring abuse is not a testament to your character. It is a testament to your conditioning. True strength requires a much rarer form of bravery. It is the courage to look at a heavy generational burden, acknowledge that it does not belong to you, and put it down. It is the terrifying, liberating decision to stop fixing the unfixable. It takes immense fortitude to stand in front of the people who raised you, the people who claim to love you, and tell them that your peace of mind is no longer the acceptable price for their comfort. When you finally draw that line, you must prepare yourself for the inevitable backlash. Setting a boundary will always look like an act of profound cruelty to those who are accustomed to exploiting you. When a parasite is detached from its host, it does not reflect on its own behavior. It simply starves and lashes out. You will be called selfish. You will be labeled ungrateful. You will be accused of tearing the family apart. You must make peace with being the villain in their fictional narrative. Let them spin their stories to whoever will listen. Let them cry in public parks and post tearful videos to their diminishing audiences. Their manufactured victimhood holds no jurisdiction in the reality you have built. The opinions of people who require you to suffer in order to belong are entirely irrelevant. A locked door does not care about the narrative of the person standing on the outside. Today I live a life defined by its quiet predictability. I return home to a coastal estate shared with a partner who respects my intellect and defends my sanctuary. My phone does not ring with manufactured emergencies. My weekends are not hijacked by unreasonable demands. The drama has been replaced by the steady, unglamorous beauty of mutual respect. It is a life I engineered through strict documentation, unwavering resolve, and the ultimate realization that my worth is not determined by my willingness to be consumed. Your life belongs exclusively to you. Your savings, your professional reputation, and your emotional bandwidth are not communal assets awaiting distribution to the loudest, most manipulative voices in your orbit. You have the inherent right to protect what you have built. You have the right to walk away from toxic tables, to revoke access to your energy, and to let irresponsible adults experience the full, unmitigated weight of their own consequences. Have you ever been called selfish simply because you stopped accepting unfair treatment? Have you ever walked away from a table where your worth was constantly questioned? Share your story in the comments. Your courage might be the exact blueprint someone else needs to finally lock their own door.